Hey guys, Luke here, and I promised you I would jump on and do a video. I didn't do a Facebook Live because I'm going to share this across a few channels here, so it's easier if I just make a video and post it to all three instead of just doing a live in one spot. But I want to go over an article from the website peakperformance.com. I think it's .com. peakenduranceport.com. It's a subscription-based site, and I see a lot of their articles. You can see a few articles for free, and then after you've viewed so many, they ask you for a subscription, which I think is $20 a month. So it's a little up there, but for me, it's great. It's a lot of the research that I don't have to do, and I can use it in what I talk to you guys about, and can kind of decipher some of the stuff for you, because it's definitely not necessarily the most enjoyable reading, but it's definitely easier than reading the research itself. So that's why I really like it. But this is by an Alicia Philly, I believe, and it appears that this is like a two-part article. But I'd like to go over this. I don't think the second part's out, but it's entitled "Energy Deficiency in Sport When the Quest for Leanness Hurts Health and Performance." And I just wanted to go over it because I think it fits so many of us pretty well, not even to the net extent of just being lean, but I think just from what I've observed in our Facebook groups and the people I coach and people I just see in general, training for marathons and going into the endurance realm of things, even beyond, and ultra 5Ks, whatever the case is, people just trying to make a lifestyle change. It's easy to pin a lot of stuff on one thing, and ultimately it comes down to a lot of things. And I think that this starts to address that in both men and in women, because I would say, like, if you look at the statistics on our free Facebook group, there's roughly 12,000 people in there. And I'd say 65 to 70% of them are women, anywhere from 30 to 45 years old. That's really where the bulk of our population in our group is. And then obviously from there, and I would say, on the men's standpoint, that's the same age group. But the point is that I've seen it affect so many people. And I think it's really just kind of a misunderstanding. Like, if things go wrong, the first thing that we all want to blame is training, because I think that's the easiest thing to blame, right? And sometimes it is the training, but ultimately, I'm always wanting to point out that you really have to look at the big picture and what all is going on. And it could be the training, but it could be the training is too much for you right now, based on other factors like in your life, stress levels, nutrition habits. All those things are going to cycle in, and they're going to play a part in it. So with that, let's just kind of jump into the article. I want to go through some stuff with you, and really kind of how you can keep track of this yourself and maybe help yourself out a little bit. So endurance athletes often believe that leaner is meaner, but while being lean comes naturally to some athletes, for most club and recreational athletes, the drive to become leaner and lighter can result in negative consequences. In this two-part series, Alicia Philly explores the impact of energy efficiency on health and performance in male and female athletes. So to fully understand relative energy deficiency in sports, which is RED-S, and if you followed anything on the Mary Cain stuff, you've seen this term pop up a lot. It's the kind of the new way we're addressing the female athlete triad, because this really goes beyond. Because ultimately this affects men as well. It's important to first discuss the evolution of the syndrome. Although seemingly recent in its origin, the roots of RED-S lie in a study of menstrual irregularity in female athletes, first noted in the literature in the 1960s. It wasn't until their 1981 annual meeting at the American College of Sports Medicine, ACSM, formally discussed the topic. By 1992, sports scientists coined the phrase female athlete triad, which I think most of us are familiar with. And it identifies a syndrome that presented as disordered eating, or DE, menstrual dysfunction, and impaired bone health. By 2007, however, ACSM tweaked this definition to explore the relationship between not only disordered eating, but overall energy availability. And this is really key, and this is where it brings in both sexes. Menstruation and bone status. The adjustment to the definition reflected the fact that both disordered eating, both anorexia, bulimia, etc., and overactivity contribute to energy deficiency. In other words, reducing input or increasing output via exercise brings the same end, a shortage of calories. This added clarity allowed sports professionals to classify athletes among a spectrum of health ranging from sufficient energy availability, normal menses, and solid bones, to low energy availability, abnormal to non-existent menstrual cycles, and osteopenia or osteoporosis. So not just men, we'll went into. So the consensus statement of in March of 2014 from the International Olympic Committee expanded this athlete health spectrum to include males and disabled athletes as well as females. Some sports scientists disagreed and argued that while male athletes may too experience consequences of low energy availability, these were distinct from that men of women. However, the IOC insisted that the triad embodied only a portion of the spectrum and integrated it along represented by a triangle into a hub of spokes, and I'll show you that now. So essentially what you used to what you would have would be the female triad system. So you would have no periods, not enough calories, weak bones. On the far left of that spectrum, on the far right, you'd have regular periods, strong bones, and enough calories. So to include everything that's going on, you now have the red S. So within that triad system, you have menstrual function, bone health, but the other things you have to look at are immunological, gastrointestinal, cardiovascular, psychological, growth and development, hematological, metabolic, and endocrine. Those things are also all affected by energy availability. And so when the caption of this says, when the body doesn't have enough energy to support the demands placed upon it, either through disordered eating or overactivity or both, the consequences go beyond bone health and menstrual functions and the effects of athletes of both genders, all ages, and any ability. All right. So then she goes on, just prior to writing this article, the IOC has once again updated the consensus statement on Red S. The barrage of research conducted since the initial statement has brought several points to light, most notably the difficulty of assessing energy availability. The temptation is to assume that energy availability is sufficient if one simply feels energetic or not. The actual definition comes down to a mathematical formula which subtracts energy expenditure of exercise, EE, from energy intake, EI, or the calories that an athlete consumes relative to fat-free mass of the athlete. So in plain English, do you consume enough calories to stay in all body systems as well as physical activity of sport? If not, then your body adjusts to reduce, and this is important because a lot of you guys, I don't think, eat enough by any stretch of the imagination. So if not, your body adjusts to reduce the amount of energy needed to maintain an equilibrium. And this is crucial, guys. And this is why you might think like, oh, I'm restricting my calories, but I'm not losing any weight. Well, your body's making adjustments to try to offset that, right? And so like what I've seen a lot of times is like people, I'll say women in particular, because it seems to be coming up the most, but like I don't lose weight. I feel bloated. I feel, I look puffy or whatever the case is, but you're not eating. And then you think you're like, I'm still eating too much. And the thing is, you're actually not eating enough. And so your body is adjusting internally to try to make up for this deficiency that you've created. And the result is you're essentially almost like you're eating the muscle itself, or whatever you eat is getting stored as fat because your body doesn't know when it's going to get energy. It doesn't know when it's going to get fuel again. So it's storing what's going to be the most productive and most energy available, which is fat. And that's ultimately like why you don't necessarily lose weight, or you might be losing weight, but you don't have the leanness that you're actually looking for. And that's a big, big component of it. So if not, then your body adjusts to reduce the amount of energy needed to maintain an equilibrium. And what I'll say to this is why a lot of times you feel sluggish too. Not necessarily the training, but it's what's coming in from a food standpoint. In most of the population, the body burns excess energy stored as fat. However, athletes who are already quite lean are at risk from the body having to compromise some aspect of physiological function in order to maintain survival. So it's not healthy. Like that's when all that other stuff comes into play. Like it could be coming from Now you're compromising your immune system, your GI system, your cardiovascular system, growth and development, blood, your metabolic. It's going to slow down your resting metabolic rate. It's going to slow it way down to try to match what you are bringing in, right? So it's not going to, so it might take a long time to feel the effects of that. Okay. Bottom line is, though, your body will try to adjust to compensate for the lack of energy coming in. All right. So how do we calculate our energy availability? Because that's what we're talking about. What's our energy availability? And unfortunately, it's a lot of math, guys. So before calculating energy availability, be aware that the results based on self-reporting, recall, and current phase of training can be highly unreliable. That's the thing too. Like a lot of times we really misjudge our serving sizes and how much we're actually eating. However, the scores obtained provide a quick guide to current energy status. And that's the whole point of me really going over this, is that ultimately, if you're at risk, you need to see somebody, right? You need to get this under control, whether it's a nutritionist that specializes in disordered eating, just going to a doctor and getting a sports physician and getting some blood work done and getting some things looked at, getting some things actually measured. This is a starting point, right? But it's a self-starting point where you can kind of get an idea where you're at and then go from there. So step one in calculating your energy availability, first discovering your fat-free mass. So multiply your total body weight in kilograms by your percent body fat to obtain your fat mass. So fat mass equals total body mass times body fat percentage. So you guys know that, right? Like, okay, so first thing is your body weight in kilograms. Take your body weight in pounds, if you use pounds, and divide by 2.2. That will give you your kilograms. Now for percent body fat, so you can either get it measured, which if you go see a personal trainer and they use skin fold measurements, it's as good as the user. It's as good as the trainer, right? It's how well they were trained. And it's basically a lot of their judgment call on some of that stuff. So you can take that with your bioelectrical impedance. You can do that. That's simply some of those scales that are pretty high tech that measure body fat percentage. It's based on electrical conduction. So if you're dehydrated, it's going to be off. So if you make sure you're really hydrated, if you want to use a formula, then you can. I found one that seems to be the most accurate, but again, it's going to be as good as how good the user is, right? So men, you would take 10.1, and I know this is probably, I have to just do another whole discussion on this, but men, 10.1 minus 0.239 times your height in centimeters plus 0.8 times the circumference of your abdominal minus 0.5 times the circumference of your neck. And that would be for men. So again, 10.1 minus 0.239 times your height in centimeters plus 0.8 times your circumference of your abdominals minus 0.5 times your circumference of your neck. So women would be 19.2 minus the 0.39H height in centimeters plus the 0.8 times your abdominal circumference and minus, then subtract from that your circumference of your neck times 0.5. And that will give you your body fat percentage. So we'll have to actually calculate this out or write this out. So that would be the first step to do. Then subtract your fat mass from your total body mass to find your fat-free mass. So it looks like, so it's fat mass equals, fat-free mass equals total body mass minus your fat mass. And then that will give you your fat-free mass. And that's what we're looking after. So now we want to calculate. And why are we doing that? Is because your fat mass isn't metabolically active. So muscle, tissue, organ, things like that, those are metabolically active. Those require energy to feed their metabolic processes. So now calculate your energy availability by subtracting exercise, energy expenditure, your triple E we talked about, so exercise energy expenditure measured in kilocalories, kcals, from your energy intake, also measured in kcals, and divide that by your fat-free mass. So you got all that. So energy availability equals, in parentheses, energy intake minus your energy expenditure
exercise energy expenditure divided by fat-free mass. So that's basically, you're gonna have to track your diet, use MapMyFitness or whatever, track your diet, get what you're bringing in, subtract from that what you're using in exercise. So if you're just running, you can easily calculate that again on your MapMyFitness or whatever you want to use, and then take what that number gives you and divide it by your fat-free mass, and that will give you your energy availability. So in their example, consider a competitive male endurance runner who weighs 70 kilograms with 10% body fat, consumes a respectable 3,000 calorie diet, and expends 1,000 kcals per day in training, which would be pretty average. Fat-free mass is 7 kilograms. His fat-free mass is 63 kilograms. Therefore, his energy availability is 2,000 calories to 3,000 minus the 1,000 divided by the 63 kilograms. That gives him an energy availability of 31.7 kcals per kilogram per day. All right, got all that. And we can run over that again. We'll have to write all that out at some point. But scientists have calculated an energy availability of at least 45 kcals per day is enough energy for physiological function in normal sporting activities. Athletes in weight-restricted sports may tolerate less. We don't need to talk about that, though. Energy availability below 30 kcals per day per kilogram per day puts the body at physiological symptoms under stress and becomes detrimental in athletes' overall health. Therefore, our sample athlete, while at an ideal weight and size for an endurance runner, consuming what most think as a sizable diet. And that's the thing. Like, if I told you a lot of you to eat a 3,000 calorie diet, you wouldn't do it. And still logging a lot of miles, is leaching energy from his body and coming dangerously close to compromising his health. All right, so now there are some problems with this. While a straightforward equation, difficulty in determining EA lies in the collection of data plug into the calculation. So as we went through, there's a lot of stuff that you have to self-report and do. But I think it's a good starting point. And so what they did was they talk about this red S category, which I'll go into in a minute. But this is what clinicians would use to see where you're at. I'll go over that for a second. But see if there's anything else I need to. No, that's all about like wrestlers and stuff. All right, so now they have a nice logo or a nice picture here. So basically, performance comes down to three things: training, nutrition, recovery, which goes into your endocrine system, and then it dictates your performance. It looks something like this. So with training, you have a high and low range. Obviously, you want to be in the middle of that. You want to be able to train at a sustainable rate. You want your nutrition at a sustainable rate, and you want recovery at a sustainable rate. So when any of those things get off, ultimately you're going to start seeing issues, maybe not right away, but it might be weeks down the road, might be months down the road. You're going to start seeing things go a little bit haywire. Performance is going to be starting to decline on that. And so I think you have to recognize that. So even if your training is in the right spot, but your nutrition is low, that's also ultimately going to affect how your performance is going to respond, right? And same thing, you can see that with recovery too. If your training's good and your nutrition's good, but let's say you take 4 days of recovery between every workout you do, your recovery is too high. You're not adapting at a rate that's going to be sustainable for progression and growth, and you just kind of stay stale. Performance is going to be hurt overall, right? So something to think about. And then they have a case study here, which I don't know if I'm going to go into or not. And it's a cyclist anyway, but essentially with this guy, he moved up, he went from like a Cat 1 to a Cat 4 cyclist. And then he really started just really kind of that fat doesn't fly mentality from a pretty old school coach. And he just really got kind of messed up from a lot of different standpoints. Like, and he was talking about his hormones and stuff being really, really messed up. And essentially they had to scale back. He wasn't told not to exercise, but he was basically under unstructured exercise until they figured out his dietary habits, got his diet stored away. And then actually now he's back stronger than he ever was before. So that's the thing. If you can figure it out and you can get the nutrition squared away, then you can really get after it. So I wanted to talk a little bit because I think ultimately you can do those calculations. You can get a decent idea of where you're at, and it can tell you at least if you're going to be low. And even if you're off a little bit on measurements or what you're taking in,
you're gonna know, like, if you need to be over 45. So if you're, over 45 on those numbers on the energy availability, and you're eating that, you want to be over 45 and you're eating over 45, you're pretty close, right? But if you need to be over 45 and you're like 35, then even measurements being off a little bit you're still going to be low, right? You'd have to be off a lot on the measurements. Like, you'd have to be cinching the next thing so tight you can't breathe. But, so I think it's a great place to start. And then if you are in one of these categories that we'll talk about, then it's a thing that it's a red flag to go see somebody who can really take a look at you from a clinical standpoint, right? So, so in this category assessment, this is really this is for medical professionals only, but I think it's good to take a look at what they would look at in you if you were in a danger zone, kind of. So same type of thing, this same spoke thing that we saw, where it affects, the endocrine, metabolic, all that good stuff. And then screening for Red-S. So Red-S may also affect athlete performance. Potential effects of Red-S on sport performance are illustrated in figure 2. And it's the same type of setup. It's that same spoke setup where you might see a decreased training response, impaired judgment, decreased coordination, decreased concentration, irritability, depression, reduced glycogen stores, decreased muscle strength, decreased endurance performance, increased injury risk. So some of those things you would need, you might not know without getting tested, some kind of blood work or something done. But some of these you'll know. Like, you'll know if you're not responding to training. You're going to know if you're having impaired judgment. You're going to know if you're irritable. You're going to know if you're getting depression. You're going to know if your performance is going down. You're going to know if you keep getting hurt more than usual, or you're in an unusual cycle of constant injury. You'll know those things. You'll know that that's a red flag for, am I getting the right nutrition in? All right. So now they have a model for sport participation, which I think is good. So high risk. This is the red light, no start. Wouldn't even let you start exercise. If you have anorexia or any other serious eating disorder, any other serious medical complications, such as psychological or physiological, related to low energy availability, use of extreme weight loss techniques leading to dehydration, induced hemodynamic instability, and other life-threatening conditions, which some of that, you're not necessarily going to know. But severe EKG abnormalities, they're not going to let you start, right? So you're probably not going to know unless you know you're anorexic or you have a eating disorder, right? If you even think you're in that risk, you need to see somebody, right? And then in the moderate risk, this is the biggest one. So prolonged abnormally low body fat percentage measured by DEXA or anthropometry. So it's not a calculation. You have to actually get that measured by somebody. Substantial weight loss, 5 to 10% body mass in a month. Attenuation of expected growth and development in an adolescent athlete. Low energy availability for a prolonged or severe nature. Abnormal menstrual cycle. Amenorrhea for more than 3 months. No menocharge by age 15 in females. Reduced bone mineral density. Again, some of these you're not going to know unless you get tested. History of one or more stress fractures associated with hormonal or menstrual dysfunction and or low energy availability. Athletes with physical, psychological complications related to low energy availability, disordered eating, diagnostic testing, abnormalities related to low energy availability. Prolonged and relative energy deficiency, disordered eating behavior negatively affecting other team members, lack of progress in treatment and or non-compliance. So that's going to be all your yellow flag categories. So they're going to be pretty cautious with you. Green light, let it rip. Appropriate physique that is managed without undue stress or unhealthy diet, exercise strategies, healthy eating habits with appropriate energy availability, healthy functioning endocrine system, healthy bone mineral density, healthy musculoskeletal. And then they have a risk assessment decision-making steps for determining readiness returning to play. So this is if you're already diagnosed with something, and then what you would have to have. And honestly, you would need to be working with somebody, some sort of professional, in order to get that done. And then they actually have like a bunch of questions and things that they would have to get. But point is, if you're in a position where you are constantly injured, you're constantly fatigued, performance is steadily declining, those types of things, I would really be thinking about doing those calculations, right? And just at least getting a baseline, because what can happen is you might even be eating more than what you're used to eating during training, but yeah, all these things are happening. You're not leaning out. You don't feel good, right? And training's just not going well. Then yes, the training is a part of that, but we have to look at the whole thing. And so that the energy availability is a great way to look at that. And so I really think that's something that is easy to do to get a starting point. Yes, it's a little bit of math. You're going to have to get maybe a measuring tape that you can use. You might have to see somebody to get measured. But there's things you can do to get that body fat percentage, and then look at that whole calculation and put it out there and give yourself a starting point. Because if you see that and you know you need to be over 45 and you're like, man, I'm at 35, you can track that and ultimately get an idea where you're at and try to improve that. And if that improves and you improve, then you know all those things were playing a part in it. But I think ultimately, because what happens is we want to blame the training, and sometimes it's denial, and sometimes it's just because we don't know. Like I said, you might be needing 3,500 calories a day and you're eating 2,500 calories, but you're used to eating like 2,000. So you're like, man, I'm eating more. Why is this going bad? And the only thing you can pin it on is the training. But in reality, it's like you're just not quite at that ceiling yet of where you need to be. And it's a good way to actually see where you're at. And then the other thing too is if you're not eating enough calories, it means you're not getting enough vitamins, you're not getting enough minerals in. All those things are going to play a role in how you're feeling and your overall health. And so I think that's a great place to start. And then it gives you a starting point. Like if you're like, oh man, I really am in trouble, then we can figure out, who do you go see? What are my options and things like that? And then from a coaching standpoint, we can say, well, let's back you off until you can get some of that blood work done, or you can see somebody and you can get that part taken care of, and we can work through the training part of it. Right. And so I think that's a big component of everything. That's the biggest thing I want you to take away from this is it's multifaceted, right? It's not like it's like if you're injured and you take rest, okay, well, you've dealt with the symptoms, but we haven't done nothing to improve the actual source of the problem, right? And so now by taking a step back and taking a look at the big picture of everything that's possibly going on, we can pinpoint the source, manipulate the other variables around there to facilitate healing and get you back to where you need to be, and then move on. And then you're going to be better and you're going to be stronger and you're more educated on what you need to do. And you're going to be an overall better runner. You're going to be a healthier runner. You're going to be a healthier person. And then you're ultimately going to be able to perform at a higher level than what you really thought you were going to be able to perform at. So I think it's important to take a look at all those things. So I know I rambled on a lot, and we'll take a look at those calculations. I'll put all those calculations out for you, and we'll go from there. So, all right, guys, we'll take it from there, and have a good rest of your week. I'll see you later. All right, bye-bye.